When a game does particularly well, it's not at all uncommon to see a sequel a few years since the original game's release. I mean, it makes sense both from the player-based standpoint as well as the development standpoint. After all, video game making is a business, and the main concern of business is making money. So if you made a game that was really successful and made you a lot of money, it would only make sense that you would like to continue riding that train and, if possible, cash in a bit more. From a single successful game, you might spawn another one, and from then another one, and before you know it, you have a whole successful franchise. And such was the case with one of my favorite shooter franchises out there, Far Cry. Despite some pretty big differences between what the original back in 2008 was and what the latest installment in 2018, 10 years later, had become, I think we can all agree that all of the Far Cry games, at least starting with Far Cry 3 back in 2012, follow a somewhat similar formula that is only slightly rehashed or changed with each new installment. Now, we do know from definitions and even from our own experience that what a sequel should do is take what the original game had done so well, iterate, improve and add on it, and hopefully create a better overall experience. So why exactly would it be that games such as Far Cry would stick so closely to a single formula that doesn't really change with each new title? I'm sure you can think of a few reasons, but today I'm going to see if I can kind of narrow them down into a few major points and try to explain if the Far Cry formula is working, and more importantly maybe why they might want to break or change it in the future. Anyways, prepare for a lot of monologuing from an amazing villain, get yourself an upgraded assault rifle, and let's go. So as already mentioned, a sequel is supposed to take what the previous game did well, iterate, possibly change on it, and create more content. But when it comes to a big company like Ubisoft, the publisher for the Far Cry games, you have to always take into consideration the player base and not just the game design. You get into a conflict of how much can I change for this to be a better game, but on the other hand, how much is my audience expecting this game to go a certain way? The reason why many games, after first latching onto a successful structure, kind of like Far Cry had, remain within the same formula is the familiarity. For your audience, and for you as the developer, it is actually really convenient if your audience already knows kind of what to expect from the next title. It might restrict your maneuverability and creativity, but at the same time, it already grants you some income without it even having to be a great game, just because the previous titles were good and this one follows a similar suit. And like I already mentioned, the main goal of a business is to make money, so it makes sense both ways. Ever since Far Cry 3, they have been kind of rehashing the same thing over and over. Whether you climb towers or you don't, whether you liberate outposts or you call it fortresses, it's more or less the same thing. And the reason why it works is because it creates and it keeps the player within a series of really strong game loops. The overall one of liberating a map or defeating some sort of a creative villain/villains, and the shorter one of liberating outposts, doing small mission quests, increasing your karma or your resistance or whichever meter that is, you know, uncovering new towers, opening maps, and doing collectibles. I mean, this structure of gameplay is in fact so popular that it has almost spawned its own genre at this point, with games such as Assassin's Creed doing pretty much the same thing, though you could potentially argue that Assassin's Creed was the game that actually created the whole idea of towers and explorations, but that's besides the point. The reason why they might not want to turn so far away from it at this point, where they've really solidified it with 4 games in fact, is the risk of alienating your player base. I mean, think for example what happens to Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. I have a separate video on that, by the way, where the first, Dark Descent, did something and they did it really well, and the second one wanted to experience with a slightly different kind of horror, and as a result, by having the trademark of Amnesia, it became a much less successful game, at least in the eyes of a lot of the player base. If your audience is expecting one thing and they come into a game to get another, you will get a similar situation to, for example, Fallout 4. A lot of hardcore Fallout fans who wanted their RPG element got kind of disappointed by how shallow the game appeared to be, with it focusing more on the shooting part. As I already mentioned, it is awesome if you can have your audience expecting a big chunk of what your game is going to be. Another thing is that it will make new features sound amazing. I mean, if you've rehashed a similar formula 3 or 4 times in a row, and then you decide to introduce something new, it makes it really easy to stack on top, and it makes your marketing team really happy, because they can plaster it all over the game. This also leads to the fact that besides the marketing team, the rest of the team will also have a pretty easy and smooth development time. If you've made the game once, and you're simply following a very tight and similar structure, repurposing it a little bit of course, but more or less doing the same thing, you can use the same pipelines you've used before, you can use the same development model, you can use the same procedures, and in general just having a pretty easy time already with people who the developer and the producer know they can trust because they've worked on the previous titles. The structure of the team doesn't necessarily need to change, the same features and the same risks are most likely to be tackled, and just give you a pretty smooth sailing experience through the development procedure. This also gives the team the freedom to explore new settings, whether it's a tropical island, whether we're in the Himalayas, whether you travel back in time in Far Cry Primal, or you go to a cyber weird thing reality in Blood Dragon. Because you don't have to worry about the base game functioning because you already know it does and you know it works well, you can explore different topics such as racism or dictatorship and focus on creating interesting and new villains like Vaas or Pagan Min from Far Cry 4. In general, because you've figured out what makes the game work, you have the MDA model clearly outlined and it doesn't change with the different installments. It doesn't matter if you are clearing outposts or you're not discovering towers and uncovering the map, because the most core game loop remains the same, focusing on gunplay and exploration. Your MDM model pretty much doesn't change as far as dynamics go, and that allows you to explore all kinds of topics in regards to the aesthetics, in regards to the setting, and in regards to storytelling as much as you want, which together with the development already being easy, makes the development for the team also interesting. So in conclusion, will they ever break the loop? Is there even any reason why they want to? Well, the answer is yes and no. I've outlined a lot of reasons for why the loop is working, why the setting and the format should probably stay the same for the sake of the studio, and why they might not necessarily be so keen on changing it. However, let's be honest, it's been a bunch of games already, and a big chunk of the player base is just slowly getting tired. Maybe not necessarily of the formula, but from the lack of innovation. So I guess from this point on, it's really up to the developer whether they want to see the series slowly wither away as each installment becomes less successful, or they want to risk going out with a bang and just completely revamp the next release and just see how it goes. Honestly, I don't know and I have no idea, but I am ready to be surprised and blown away by whatever the Far Cry team comes out with next. Anyways, that is it from me and my opinions on the video. I feel like I can't stress this enough, but these were all my opinions. I didn't talk to anyone on the Far Cry team, unfortunately. If you want to talk, please contact me. And all of these simply stem from my experience with the industry and my research online. If you guys have any other opinions or any things that you think I didn't mention or things that you disagree with, please make sure to leave them down in the comments. I would be really interested to read them and maybe start a discussion. If you guys enjoyed the video, maybe consider leaving a like, commenting, or subscribing. All of those would be very much appreciated. I wish you all a beautiful rest of today, and I'm gonna see you all in whatever next video I make. Bye bye.